The section that we're up to now is one that is, on the face of it, most degraded and most depraved. And we'll need to understand it on several levels. Number one, on the level of pshat, and then we'll try to understand and mine it for some of its lower strata in order to hopefully enrich our understanding of it and appreciate what it is doing in the Chumash. To state what may be obvious to us on one level, but another level is actually quite revolutionary, the Torah includes a story like this, a Torah that makes its best efforts to avoid, as the Gemara in Psachim teaches us, even speaking in a manner that is unbecoming or lacking in propriety. And yet, this story appears to us in chapter 19, black fire on white fire, telling us the whole story in all its gory details of some kind of really depraved scenario where there is an incestuous relationship at the instigation of these daughters with their own father, which is itself mind-boggling. And we should open on the level of pshat with the recognition of how degraded it is. Don't quote me Rashi, don't quote me the Medrash first, just on the level of pshat to just marvel, not in a positive sense, but really with a macabre fascination. What is this doing in Chumash? And how low, how terribly off kilter could the family of Lot be that they're up to this? Just to preempt what someone will no doubt figure out on their own, but I'll just put it out there. This is not the first person in the Torah who is faced with a terrible destruction, survives, gets lost or loses himself in drunkenness, and that net result is some type of sexual abuse of some sort at the hands of his own child. This is the second time. And see here, of course, all of the bells should be ringing about Noach. We have to understand this story, I think, against the backdrop of that story. For want of time, we won't start going back to learn all of the psukim in Parshat Noach about this subject, but it's instructive to have it at least in the back of your mind. Oh, there are parallels between these two. It's actually going to be sort of the gateway to understanding something on a deeper level. But first, on the level of pshat, I'm in chapter 19, verse 30. I'm reading over one pasuk that we did last time. We didn't learn this last time, actually. So last week, Lot is in Zoar, and he doesn't stay there. Now, does he not stay there because Zoar was only given a reprieve, and it was also slated for destruction, and he intuited this, so he left? Or is it that he saw the terrible destruction happening all around and panicked and gave flight? And it's not clear on the level of pshat. One could read it in either way. Verses 27 and 28, pasuk chav zayin chav chet, is the story. It's just a different perspective of Avram Avinu looking down at Sodom and Amorah, not with condescension, excuse me, but certainly from a perch of moral superiority, in addition to the topographical superiority of what Avram Avinu is up to. Excuse me. Okay. So that's verse 27 and 28. With all the associations we talked about last time of the kivshan, kikitor kivshan, like a fire rising out from a furnace, and many of us are familiar with the midrashic account of Avram being saved from a fiery furnace, his brother Haran not being saved, his nephew Lot now being saved from a fiery furnace, emerging from it. And of course, as Chazal understand it, and it seems to be hinted at here, even on the level of pshat, it's in the merit of Avraham that this happens, not really Lot's merit per se. Pasuk Chavtet, verse 29. Vayi b'shachet Elohim et arei hakikar, vayizkor Elohim et Avraham, vayishalach et Lot, mitoch ha'afecha ba'hafoch et ha'arim asher yashav bahen Lot. So at the time that God was destroying all these cities of the plain, of this area, God remembered Avraham. Now, remembrance here, of course, is not in the sense of intellectual memory, like God has a memory bank and he called it up. Oh, yes, right? It means in the sense of a compassion, a feeling of connection. We have this notion of the zechira the remembrance that is related to Yom HaZikaron, which doesn't mean God remembers as much as God cares. God's connected, linked, etc., to us, to our issues. It's the same for Yom HaZikaron, which is the Torah's view, Torah's wording for Rosh Hashanah. It's true about Pesach, that God remembered. It's true of all of the barren women throughout Jewish history in the Torah, described in Enoch. God remembers them. Vashem pakad et Sarah, Vayiskor Elokim et Rachel, etc., etc. So he sends out Lot from the inferno, from the conflagration. The hafecha is something that is turned upside down. Vayal Lot, verse 30 now, pasuk lamed. Vayal Lot mit Zoar. He left Zoar. Vayeshev bahar. He went to go be in the mountains. We know approximately where this mountain range is. If you've ever been to, I mentioned last time, Matzada, so that's the mountain range. When you're standing in the area of Sdom and you see those mountains all along, up and down, north to south, that's what you're referring to. Shelly, are you a comment? Go ahead.
Yes. Okay, it says Vaya'al. Whenever we're always supposed to look when something says Vayered and when it says Vaya'al.
Yes.
So he's going up, which should be a positive thing. But considering what's happening, is there another word that they could, do they want to say that positive thing? Is there another word they could have used to have gone, if they're just talking about it topographically? Because I can't help but think somehow this is,
It's a good point. My inclination when I read it, having been to the area in the vicinity of Sodom, as many of us have, is, it's very low down. It's the lowest point on earth. So obviously he's going up. But yeah, I guess you could say spiritually as well. He's emerging. He's going to a higher plane than he was when he lived in Zoar. Could be. I did not see any comments on it per se about the Vayal, but it seems he raised himself up. He got out. He escaped. He emerged somehow from being inside what was about to be the conflagration engulfing Zoar, or maybe not, but it's in the surrounding areas, and he's spooked and he runs away. It could be. The Targum of Onkelos is uslik, means he left, he departed. He departed Zoar, says Vayal, lot mit Zoar, not referring to anything either topographical per se or spiritual. But I guess one could make the case. He was, going higher. Karen, thanks for that comment. Yeah, anyone who left from Sodom was automatically going up topographically, but you could say spiritually too. Okay, so Vayal lot mitzor vayeshiv bahar ushtei v'notav imo ki yarei lashevet b'tzoar vayeshiv b'mara hu ushtei v'notav. He's afraid to be in Zoar. He and his two daughters go up. It reminds us that he goes with the two daughters up to Zoar, and he's in a cave. He and his two daughters. By the way, where's Lot's wife? Leading question. Everybody knows she's already dead. She turned into a pillar of salt. That story was back on verse, what was it? Trying to find it on myself, where she turns into a pillar of salt. When they leave, they're told in verse 17, don't turn around, don't look behind you, etc.
Kafav.
Pasuk, what number?
Kafav.
Oh, thank you.
26.
Thank you. Yeah, 26. Good. So here, just, again, on the level of pshat, she's dead. She turned into a pillar of salt. But already, Rashi, based on Chazal, on verse 26, Pasuk Chavav, want us to know that there's actually, so to speak, a backstory, that she's getting somehow her just desserts. B'melach chat'av u'melach lakta. She sinned with regard to salt, and she was punished with regard to salt. Amar la. He said to her, Tnimat melach la'orchim halalu. Can you give a little bit of salt, a pinch of salt, on the food for these guests? Amra lo. She said to him, Afa minhag hara hazeh ata ba lahanig b'makom hazeh. You want to bring this terrible tradition here, meaning of sharing, right? So she castigated her husband for bringing the minhag, a minhag of hachnasat orchim, a minhag of chesed, into her midst. And what happened to her? She became that pillar of salt. The Medrash goes on elsewhere to go even further to say that she's the one who informed everyone that the two visitors were in Sodom by going door to door and saying, excuse me, do you have any salt I could borrow? All right. I have two guests in my home. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And the point is, she was the one who told all the people to converge on the house. Rashi doesn't mention that here. Rashi just focuses on the fact that she complained about salt. And of course, salt is the best analogy for this, because how much does salt cost? How prevalent is salt? How much salt does one have to borrow? The idea that this was the biggest loss was the salt. That was what, threw her over the edge. But it was really indicative of something that was much more, I would say, rotten to the core about her character and the like. Now, why did I just give you a non sequitur mention? Oh, by the way, Lot's wife. What's happening with Lot and his daughters now is related to something that Lot himself did previously. Do you remember?
Yeah, he offered his daughters in place of the visitors.
He doesn't understand the basics, that if you have two visitors in your house and the mob is coming to get them, that the way to hold them off is probably not to say, by the way, I have two unmarried daughters. Let me give them to you as some kind of a peace offering. That in and of itself was misguided is the wrong word. It was depraved. It was
okay,
insane.
but that's Peshat. This medrash that you're telling us about the salt is a medrash, and
Right.
Looking back to where your daughters and the rest of your family is
Right.
had a configuration. You're talking about Noah or Lot having PTSD. She could have had PTSD too. I don't want to make her.
Who knows? Who knows? Fine.
no,
I'll grant you the point. Even if you didn't go for Rashi, that the reason she becomes salt, by the way, the reason she becomes salt is because there's sulfur and salt that's falling from the sky. That's when the Melach, she became a mineral. She was fossilized, whatever the word is. That's the idea of Tinitz L'Netziv Melach. Chazal indicate that it's related to something about some sin that she had been involved in, or some tsarut ayin, some type of a jaundiced eye with which she looked at whatever was good within Lot, and therefore she got her just desserts. That's the only reason I was quoting it. So I'm saying, even on the level of pshat, without making recourse to any midrashim or anything, the idea that the symmetry, it's a very mixed up symmetry, but it's still some symmetry, that Lot will end up somehow having some kind of liaison with his daughters, which is mind-boggling, is actually not entirely unrelated to the idea that to Lot, he was dismissive of his own daughters. He was willing to sacrifice them on the altar of his hachnasat orchim that he learned from his uncle. Now, I'm not saying he was a willing participant here. Obviously, he was made very drunk and the like. I'm just pointing out that there's something about what happens with Lot before, when the guests are in the house, and what happens with Lot now, that is also some element of midah keneged midah. You spoke and were willing to give your daughters over to the mob. You'll end up in that position yourself with some kind of degraded scenario. And here, as we keep reading, we see that actually they realize their father's not just going to agree. Verse 31. Avinu zakein v'ish ein ba'aretz lavo aleinu kederech kol haaretz. So the elder said to the younger, our father is very old, and there's no a man basically who's going to be willing to marry us. Some of the commentators say that's because, on the level of pshat, because they said if we just came from this destruction, probably no one will want to have anything to do with us, because they'll know, oh, you're from Sdom, bad people. Other commentators say the polar opposite. They still held themselves, I don't know, I think this is more of a stretch, in some kind of higher regard as aristocrats. And now that they had emerged, they said, whoever's left is going to be the bottom. I was about to say salt of the earth, but that's the wrong thing to say in this context. The bottom of the barrel. This is the worst, the dregs. There's no one there. I'm not getting to Rashi yet about destruction of the world. Hold on, because that's sort of justifying what they did. I'm still on the level of, they figured out, on the level of pshat, there's nobody in the land that's going to be willing to marry us in the way of the world. So we'll get our father drunk. We will lie with him, and we will cause our father's progeny to continue. Remember, and this Shelley made this point, I don't know if you meant it this way, but the rest of the family's dead. So there's this idea about like replacing the family members who have died. We know that these two women had two sisters who were married. They got killed. And we know, of course, that Eshet Lot was killed. So now it's them and their father. So there's some idea, perhaps they have, Unechayem Avinu Zara will cause our father's seed to continue. Vatashkena et avihen yayin balayla hu, vatavo b'chira vatishkav et aviha, v'loyada b'shichva uvekumah. So the idea that he was so drunk, that's what we call in halacha shichruto shel Lot. It's the drunkenness of Lot, where moral moorings are so off kilter, and a person's awareness is so unbelievably askew that even this could happen. It's unthinkable. Vayhimi mocharat, vator b'chira latzira, hein shachavti emesh et avi, nashkenu yain gam alayla, uvoy shichvi imo nechem avinu zara. Now the elder gives the idea to the younger to repeat the same action. Again, vatashkena gam alayla hu et avihen yain, vatokom atzira, vatishkav imo, v'lo yada b'shichva uvekumah. By the way, how does we got the first night? However it happened, they got him crazy drunk. The second night, he agreed again to get drunk. So he's totally unaware of what happened. A possibility, a very good possibility. Another possibility is he somehow strangely colluding. Possible. I'm not voting. I'm just raising it to the level of pshat. And again, we find out he has no idea. But they become impregnated through their father, which makes for a very strange family tree, of course, right? Because their children are also their siblings somehow. Very strange. The elder gives birth to a son. She calls him Moav, and that's the father of the nation of Moab. We're learning here the foundational story of Moab. Vatzira gamhi yalda ben, vatikra shmo ben ami, hu avi bnei Ammon ad hayom. And that's where we get to the bnei Ammon, the Ammonites, until today. End of story. Next story is a little pause here in the Sefer Torah. There's a little Parsha Stuma space, and then we're going to come to Avram Avinu going down to the Negev, and we'll get to that story next time. And when we get there, we will talk a lot about how actually it is a second story about Avraham and Sarah, where the morality of Avram Avinu and of Sarah Imenu is put to the test in an ambient culture that is in and of itself immoral and depraved, and where actually it is of value to them to remain faithful to each other and, of course, faithful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're not going to go there today, because then we're going to go to chapter 20. That's Perek Chaf. That's next time. But staying here today, I'm curious, and again, we're being recorded, so I ask you, please, I urge you just to use language that's appropriate and the like. But what do you make of this story without, and I'm saying the only thing not to mention yet, don't bring up what Rashi has to say and the Medrash has to say about any heroics and about Mashiach Tzidkenu, just Gufa, the story. What do you think, Karen?
There's something about that line of Moab, isn't there? I mean, it starts here, and then you've got Ruth, who's at the foot of Boaz, and then, of course, we know it ends up with David HaMelech. So there's just this pattern going through of inappropriateness, so to speak, in the line of Moab.
Excellent, for sure. And Ammon?
Okay.
I don't know. Ammon. Now, there is later in Tanakh, Naamah, the Ammonite, in Sefer Malachim Aleph, is mentioned by the by as the mother of Rechavam ben Shlomo, which means Shlomo was married to Naamah Ammonite. And at least unless we're not in Sefer Malachim yet, we'll be there in chapter 14, probably in about a year from now at the rate that we move in that Thursday morning class, as we're rounding out Sefer Shmuel Bed. But she's mentioned also. So certainly there's no impropriety or anything like that's going on in that story, but something there.
Rabbi, there's lots of problems with this. Just thinking about it from a logical point of view, and I want to try to say this in a clean manner. People have performance issues when they're drunk. So he is able to perform. They're able to conceive a child on the first
encounter, right?
It's
First
this
try.
encounter, and nothing is mentioned about, okay, they conceive a child. If, let's say he really doesn't know what happened with the second daughter, which is hard to believe, they show up pregnant. They're unmarried. Why? There's nothing said about what Lot thinks about this, or what anybody in the surrounding place where they live thinks about this, or anything else. I'm sure the commentators must have something to say about all of that.
Don't be so sure.
Oh, really? Well, I mean, I can't help but think those are all very important stuff. So what we think of this as being, or at least, we think of this as being absolutely horrible, no matter what happens in the future. Yeah. And Rehoboam doesn't turn out to be such a great guy. I mean, so
don't take him safe from Malachim. We'll stay right here.
Okay, so I don't know what I'm trying to figure out what we're supposed to learn from this.
Yeah.
Just how degraded he became.
So let me offer the following at risk of
Rabbi?
delving into. Oh, sorry, Jean first. Go ahead. Yeah,
You know,
Shelley, I'll come back to you. Your response.
We're looking at it from our view and from the Judaic view. But in ancient times, which is when this lived, unfortunately, this was not uncommon, especially in the royal families. It was very, very common for a father to have relations with his daughters, with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And, we talk about Sodom, but this may have been, not knowing Sodom, but it may have been something that would not have been looked askance at in Sodom, in their culture, which is where these girls were raised.
Yes. Okay. So I want to respond. I have to respond to you first, Jean, because it's actually, it was going to be the lead out from what I was going to say to Shelley, but actually now you touched on it right here. In the culture of the ancient Near East, I actually read a paper a few years ago that this was the case in Egypt as well. Ancient Egypt, this was a very prevalent thing in the royal family, very prevalent. And when you realize that, you start realizing that if you look in the book of Vayikra, chapter 18, which talks about different aspects of morality in terms of relationships, it prefaces it by saying, don't do like the ways of the land of Egypt. And
that's usually brothers as opposed to father and daughter.
Well, hold on. Okay, but Jean's point is, yes, it is in the ancient Near East, in the ancient culture. We're conditioned today to cringe. And I have opened with this whole introductory passage or piece here that, you don't teach this to kids in nursery school. And even in third grade, the sort of like, Sodom got destroyed. And then Avram moved and they skipped this, like the kids aren't going to read it, and there might be good reasons. I'm not trying to criticize Khalila, early childhood education, everything in its own time. The point is, we're conditioned to say this is immoral, and depraved and terrible. There was a time in the broad scheme of world history, not so long ago, we're talking about 3,700 years ago, 3,800 years ago. Again, the broad scheme of human existence. It's not the beginning of creation exactly, where actually maybe this wasn't as morally depraved as we think. Now I'm gonna just mention something which you may find controversial, but you can look this up. I've given this a lot of thought based on the writings of this professor from NYU, Jonathan Haidt. I highly recommend his book, The Righteous Mind, why good people disagree about politics and something of politics and morality. And he really, I think, unpacks in a brilliant way different axes of morality that different people have, without getting into all of the back and forth about it. The one salient point for today is he says that if all of your morality is reduced to one principle, the harm principle, which is, as long as I'm not harming anyone else, I'm not doing anything immoral. If you've reduced it to that, but there are other people for whom morality is a much broader category than just, am I hurting someone else? Then you start to have a divide between those two people. And he gives examples, and some of them are actually rather graphic, not for a family audience, if you will. You can read them. But here would be a great example from the Torah. Was Lot harming anyone? Were his daughters harming anyone? So on the face of it, you say, not really. We say, well, wait a minute. He wasn't consenting. He was drunk. So we're applying like all these, ideas from the modern world. But from a moral standpoint, right? Just generally, if the only axis we have is, are you hurting someone now? They said, listen, we have good intentions. Our intentions are we want to continue to propagate our father's progeny. He is, I'll insert words into Jean's thought that she didn't necessarily say, but we're of royal stock. He was the magistrate of Sdom. Nobody else is left from there. Let's propagate. It says, what's really wrong with it after all? What's the problem here? There is a parallel morality that could argue this, and Jonathan Haidt makes the point. This is actually the morality of many, many people who are weird. He calls them weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and D is like, I think, democratic. People who are from weird cultures have generally more of a possibility that all of their morality has been collapsed into one question. Am I hurting anyone now? And if the answer is no, then what could be wrong with it? Okay, a Jewish morality pushes against that idea. B'shtei yadayim. We push that away and reject it. Chas v'shalom, that's the beginning and the ending of our morality. In the world of Lot, not the world of Avraham, where he came from, but in the world of Lot, of the ambient culture of Sdom and the children of Lot, who did not know from Uncle Avraham. They heard, we have this great uncle. His name is Avraham. He lives somewhere up in the mountains. They don't know from that. But Lot, he does know from that. What was the best example of where Lot understood this? It's from the silence of Lot, Chazal tell us, and you can read it in the level of Pshat. When Avram and Sarah and Lot get to the land of Canaan, there is a famine. Where do they go? Down to Egypt. And what happens promptly when they arrive? We hear nothing about Lot. We just hear that Sarah is taken by Paro. And then Paro gives her back. Mysteriously, he gets plagues. He gives her back. He doesn't lay a hand on her. He gives Avram gifts. And who else gets tons of gifts? Lot. So Chazal say, well, where was he? Was he there? Yes, he was quiet. So he was quiet, therefore they didn't mention his name. Yeah, but Chazal point out, you know what else happened? The fact that he didn't say, well, there's a morality that would permit the king to have his way with someone's wife, or the two of these are brother and sister, knock off the brother, you'll get the sister. But he stayed quiet. I mean, they weren't brother and sister, but you understand they were related. Yeah, Avram and Sarah, you know this, yeah? So the idea here that, Lot could have said he was the brother of Sarah. Sorry, and you get rid of the husband, they're not really brother and sister like they say they are, right? So the point is, there could have been this alternate morality by Lot foisted upon Avram and Sarah to the ruin of Avram and Sarah. In other words, not ruin morally, but they would have been, Avram would have been killed. But he stayed quiet. He understood that the morality of an Avram Avinu was such that he had to say, this is my sister, and therefore to bargain this suitor after that suitor to try to hold them all at bay to protect her. Chapter 20, which is not for today, is also going to be a story like that, where perhaps Avraham misjudges the way in which Avimelech, the king of Gerar, operates in terms of his morality. But it wasn't without cause, based on how a lot of society functioned. And here in Sdom, when in Sdom, this is what the people do. So now Lot's daughters, that's what they know. And they figured out that, well, why not? To you and me, I'm going to go out on a limb. Living in 2021, 5781, you read this story and you cringe. It's just insanity. How did this happen? How could it be? But in the culture in which they lived, as Jean was mentioning, this is actually not necessarily so incredibly terrible. And Shelley,
you still have the question of that he did not consent.
Okay.
They knew he would not consent, or they would have said something to him. Well, we need to do.
Yes, I know. And here's the great thing. That's exactly the point, is that Lot still remembers the Haim. He remembers being Haimish by Avram and Sarah Imaini, that they had guests and they had Achnasis Orchim. And he remembers that by Avram and Sarah, this we don't do. But the daughters, they don't have a clue. Lot's wife, she's screaming at him, what are you hosting guests for? Now, again, you don't want to go into the world of Rashi, you want to stay in the level of Pshat. She turned into a pillar of salt because she looked behind her and the angel said, don't. Why did she do that? Because she could care less about what they said or because curiosity got the better of her. It doesn't matter. She's dead. And the daughters, their morality is the morality of the culture where they grew up, not the stories they heard from the Fetter Avram. They don't know from him. He's like this curiosity. They've not heard of. They heard these stories. He's this magical man. He's a prophet and he's brilliant and he believes in one God. Yeah, Dad, we get it, but the morality here is what it is. Now look with me one page. Go at Pasuk Chavtat, verse 20.
I'm swallowing my words. Can I just say one thing? It's
yeah, please.
Exactly Mida Keneged Mida.
Oh,
go ahead. Because he's giving his daughters to these. And now they're making the choice.
Right. Beautiful.
Dead to the world.
Go
they're saying, we're going to take over. And this is what
exactly.
I love it. It's great. Thank you.
Shot. Now look at Rashi with me. Pasuk Chavtat, verse 29. Now we come to Rashi. Look at what Rashi says, verse 29. If you have Rashi, if not, I'm going to read it word for word. When the Torah says, God remembered Avraham, Vayiskor Elokim et Avram, what does it say? Ma'uz chirato shel Avraham al Lot. It was the remembrance of Avraham regarding Lot. What is that? Rashi was trying to understand. It should have been God remembered Avraham, right? And he remembered Lot, his relative. But it doesn't say that. It says that when Hashem was destroying the cities of the plain, Hashem remembered et Avraham. And then he sent Lot out. So Rashi says the following. Nizkar shehaya, what did God remember? What was the one little merit that Lot had? Nizkar shehaya Lot yodea shesara ishto shel Avraham v'shama shamar Avram b'mitzrayim al Sara achotihi v'lo gila hadavar. Lot was in Egypt. Lot heard when Avram said to the Egyptians, this is my sister. Lot knew it wasn't true, but he did not reveal it. Shahaya chas alav, because he had compassion for Avraham. Lefichach chas HaKadosh Baruch Hu alav. Therefore, God had compassion for Lot. And here we are back again. And now they're going to go up with the daughters, but nonetheless, Stom is Stom. So Lot, he understands there would be something wrong, morally wrong with number one, revealing the secret that would get Avram Avinu killed. He knows that's wrong. And he understands the basic rationale why Avram did what he did or lied in the way that he lied in order to keep his wife alive. Therefore, Lot, as Shelley was pointing out, Lot isn't going to give consent to what happens here, because if you asked Lot, he would say, no, of course not. And they would say to him, why not, Abba? You want your progeny to continue going. You see what the culture here does. What would Lot have said? But I'm Avram Avinu's nephew. We have a morality of relationships that is not just about whether people are being harmed or not, but about a certain sense of propriety that is actually animated by only one, by what God wants, by God's will. And there are mitzvahs. It would be natural for the father and his daughters to have a union. It would be natural. No, says Lot, I won't accept this. I won't accept. Can I read what you said it to everybody? Karen writes, we don't believe in moral relativity. Understanding why Lot's daughters did what they did doesn't justify it. For sure. Exactly the point. But they live in a world that is actually all about a moral relativity. So to them, it's like, why not? What's the big deal? Now, when you see this, and the contrast is so stark, right, between the fact that Avram Avinu has this code of ethics, right? He's not willing to give away his wife to save his life, like some kind of chattel, as Lot's willing to give away his daughters like chattel. But Lot is always this, like, he's this sparking, flickering light, like he's sort of got it from Avram, but then he misses something. And you see this here again. And the daughters, they're not Avram, I don't know, Avram and Sarah, I don't know. And there's the contrast also of this story, this horrific story. And we're curious, well, what happened after that? What's the next part? Well, what did Lot say when he had these children? Mazel tov? How did you get pregnant? Did he say it was a miracle? What did he say? We don't have a clue on the level of pshat. But if you're living in the ancient Near East, let's say you are an Israelite and you've made aliyah from Mitzrayim and you came up and you live now in the land of the Canaanim, you know 100% that from the beginning of the book of Breisheet, there's a taboo, don't marry the people from Canaan. Remember? No marrying people from Canaan. Now you open the Chumash and you learn in Parshat Vayera about this story, which the Torah tells us is forbidden, all things being equal, definitely forbidden. And this is the foundation story of Moab and Ammon. Now, who lives just off to the east of the Jewish people, actually interacting with them? Moab and Ammon. But with their foundation story is known to you to be so low, go near that. And in fact, the Torah later on does codify that one is not allowed to marry into the nation of Moab or marry the men from the nation of Moab and the nation of Ammon. But oddly enough, that's the whole Chiddush. It's Moavi velo Moaviyah, right? Lo yavo Ammoni velo Ammonit. So the people who are from Ammon and Moab, the women, paradoxically, are actually able to be joining the Jewish people. And of course, that's now you can fill in the ellipsis about the story of what's going on with the rising up of a David HaMelech, etc. But you see that there is something going on here. Now, Shelley, I don't know the answer. The Mesopotamians had the same morality as the Egyptians. I take as a.
What about the Mesopotamians? Because later, they must not hear us. And Abraham and Yitzchak want their kids to marry back from there. So there must not have been this.
I think it was better. Yes, I believe. I'm speaking out of ignorance, but my assumption is that is something that is related to why Abraham and Yitzchak don't want their children to marry Canaanite women. They want them to go back to the old country, to Haran at least, to Aram Naharaim, to that vicinity. Now, I did this deliberately while we were learning this together on the level of Pshat, because before you can get to the level of Medrash, you have to just start on the level of Pshat to understand like what happened here. And it's important to see the stark contrast between a morality of Judaism and the morality that is the morality of these nations that emerge from these two daughters who themselves are products of the culture of Sodom. Look who their mother was. That's who they are.
Rabbi.
Helen.
Rabbi.
Helen, go ahead.
Yes. Morality has been talked about, and I'm wondering if in the story of Noah, one of the sons are disrespectful to the father, and
right.
that son is cursed.
Yeah, right.
So the idea of morality is out there, whether they knew about it or not, but it's not that it wasn't there. There was a strong story about it.
Sure, there certainly was. And of course, the Torah itself, the beginning of Parshat Noach, testifies that the way of the world, right? Beginning of Parshat Noach actually uses that expression to tell us that if you look at chapter 6, verse 12, actually means that there is some kind of immorality and depravity going on, which is, by the way, not entirely separated at all from violence. That the loose morality in one realm would breed a loose morality in another and lead to boundary violations of other sorts as well, whether that was in terms of assault, whether it was in terms of thievery, right, appropriation, all of this connected. If you look at the end of Parshat Breisheet, even prior to that, in chapter 5, the idea that the sons of the lords were taking the daughters of man, right, which you can read, as many of the Farshim do, not in any mystical way. It just means the robber barons decided, we're running things, we'll just take the pick of the litter. We'll take whoever we want, we'll treat them like chattel, and we could care less that they're already married to somebody else. Might makes right, that kind of depraved morality, right? I have 3 minutes left, so let me cut to the quick on
I just wanted to know if Lot's daughters knew anything about the Noah story.
I don't know. Although Chazal do describe that well, we'll see it in Rashi. Look with me at Rashi, verse 31. V'ish ein ba'aretz. There's no man in the land. Lavo aleinu. So there's no man who's gonna want to come to be with us. Says Rashi, ve'ish ein ba'aretz. This is, of course, the midrashic key in the lock, which helps us understand it again on a different plane. It's not to negate the initial direct understanding and level of pshat. It's to enhance it by going to another stratum. They were of the opinion that the entire world had been destroyed, just like in the generation of the flood. Helen, that's to your remark before. They were of the opinion, they knew the legends of the world. They knew there had once been a destruction of the world. And now when nobody's left, there's no choice. Oh, what are you going to do? We're stuck. So we're going to do something that is on the face of it depraved, but we're doing it for the right reasons. We're doing it in order to propagate planet Earth. There's nobody left on planet Earth. And in fact, the Medrash uses the language. They thought that there had been, instead of a mabul shel mayim, a deluge of water, there was instead of mabul shel eish, a fire that was an all-encompassing, all-engulfing fire, and that they saw that either Tzoar now also got destroyed, or some Mepharshim say it hadn't yet been destroyed because it wasn't going to be destroyed, but they thought, you see that raging fire, will never make it out of here. One of the Mepharshim, I forget who now, points out that Lot was actually telling them, you know what, Avram got killed too. In other words, he was so embarrassed he doesn't want to go see Avram. He told them, I heard Avram is dead. No one's alive. We're the only ones left. Now, as a way of deterring them from trying to go to live with Avraham, etc., to sort of keep the family unit together, whatever it was. And so that becomes his punishment. What we see here, though, if you take this, now why did Chazal reach for this, by the way? There are the parallels to the story of Noach, destruction in a massive way, the following on the heels of that, of people getting drunk out of despair or for whatever reason, the idea that there is some kind of assault that happens when the person is drunk. What we don't see, let me say it the other way. What we do see in the story of Noach is he wakes up from his drunkenness and he curses his son. He curses the grandson. Remember, that's in the story, right? What doesn't happen in the story of Lot? Why doesn't Lot, it never tells us that when the kids are born, did he ever figure it out? Did he say to them, you disgusting, despicable daughters, I disown you? Did he curse them? None of that. Why not?
Right.
Chazal say, because we have a tradition that he understood, it was terrible, but it was a mistake, based on the mistaken understanding that if there was no one left on planet Earth, we would take the ultimate terrible action to continue the human race. We'd keep going somehow. Now, where are the angels? They're out. They're gone. They're finished. Their job is done. You notice? And left to their own erroneous understandings of the world, they may even do something really, really terrible. But as Chazal point out, and Karen references, I think Shelley references earlier, right? You have the whole idea that eventually Mashiach Tzidkenu emerges somehow, oddly enough, from Moab, descended of Ruth, descended of Ruth to David, right? And the idea that this theme, this line of what begins even out of the inferno, out of the lowest place on earth, out of the most terrible place of sin, but that could emerge ultimately and climb and climb. By the way, climbing is not without its fits and starts, without its stumbles, and it's rolling back down the hill. Think of David. We're talking a lot about David, and then we're coming already to the end of our discussions about David after years of talking about him every Thursday morning at 9:30. You're also welcome this week to come join us as product placement. But what's the idea? That he also struggled. There also were problems. There also were issues. Okay, even from there can be tshuva. Even from there can be rescue. Even from there could be matzmiach keren Yeshua, the growth organically, and the organic peace, davka, ultimately of salvation, of the Mashiach Tzidkenu, arising from even such a lowly story. And I hope, even though it's a really shocking and a challenging story, there is a hopeful message that emerges that even a person who sinks to a low level, they're not beyond redemption. It might not be in their generation, maybe generations later, but there could still be the seedling, the kernel, even from something so terrible can come something so great and so wonderful. We're still waiting for that to find its the time period of the final redemption. But you see, this story is it's in a certain way, it's a very terrible, what's the word? Subterranean the basement with rot and terrible things happening, but it also turns out it's the basement of the foundation of the structure, which culminates in the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu, which we're still waiting for until today. So today we just studied this little piece in the end of chapter 19, and we'll see next week the contrast between this and next week when we go back to the world of Avraham and Sarah, and they're going to Gerar, and how they're going to deal with the immorality, perceived immorality of the town of Gerar, the people of Gerar, the king of Gerar. And the stark contrast between these two, I think, is something that is on display for us really in these parshiot, highlighting the fact that for Avram and Sarah, morality was not just, are you hurting someone? Morality also very much had to do with, what does Hashem want? And if I can do something, doesn't mean I ought to do something. What is the Ratzon Hashem? And we're blessed in a way that Avram and Sarah were not. We have access to the actual Torah HaKadosha, the Torah Shebichtav, Torah Shebal Peh. We have access to understanding to try to parse issues of this morality. It's sometimes extremely challenging for us on so many levels, starting with the human level, but even on the level of ideas, sometimes we find it's confusing, etc. We live in a confusing time, and hopefully the Torah will continue to be our guidebook in this regard. So that's it for today, and I'll hope to see you next week.